so Joan's going to record this so that we can post it later. And my name is Catherine Wisner, and I'm with the University of Wyoming, Laramie County Extension Office here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. And I'm going to do a program on starting seed and some of the equipment materials you need or don't need. So I have all my stuff here, and what I want to start off with is that you don't need anything special to start seeds in. I've got a tray over here, so I'm trying to see what I want to make sure that you guys can see what I see. So I do have what's called a 10-20 tray over here where I've started some seeds and I've got it all labeled. But you don't need anything that fancy to start seeds in. You can use something as simple as deli containers. This is a salad bowl container that I got a couple days ago, and so I'm starting tomatoes in there. I've got the date on there and the variety of tomato, and I'm growing Cora-likes in there, and those are cherry tomato. And then in this milk jug, I am growing Amur Prior Beta tomatoes, and I've got the date that it started, that I put the seeds in there, and it was 3/28, and you can see that they already come up. Tomatoes are some of the easiest seeds to get going. But I've also got milk cartons. This is a cream carton and a milk carton that I have cut off, and these all work. Again, I've got deli containers. This is a water bottle, and I've just cut the top off, and this makes a great little greenhouse. I've cut it a little bit more so I can just fit it over the top and make a greenhouse out of it, and we'll plant something in that. One of the important things with starting seed is having the right soil mixture, and you can't do this with, you really shouldn't start vegetable seeds with your garden soil, at least the inside ones. The garden soil is going to be too heavy. It's going to have weed seeds in it and possibly some plant pathogens that could take out your little seedlings. So you always want to start with some potting soil or buy your own seed starting mix. And in my case, I make my own seed starting mix. And I do a 1-to-1 ratio. So I will do 1 part perlite, and that's this white stuff. This it's a volcanic material that's been baked, and so it's sterile. Then I have regular potting soil, and then I've gotten some peat moss. And so I want this seed starting mix to be very light and fluffy so that that new root has an easy opportunity to get started. So I just mix it 1-to-1. I'm going to do it in my vinegar container here. And so then these become seed starting containers. And a little bit of soil in there, potting soil. Then I mix it all together, and I want it to be really light and fluffy so that the seeds have an easy opportunity to put down good strong roots. So it went from a regular potting mix that is fairly heavy to something that's going to be a whole lot lighter, especially with the peat moss and the perlite added to it. And I am now just going to take a little bit of this soil, the seed starting soil, and put it in the container. I don't want to fill the container full, and I don't put drainage holes in the bottom, and I don't put any little rocks in the bottom of it either. I'm not going to water it so much that I flood it. And that's sort of one of the keys with starting seed, is that you don't want so much moisture in there that you can see it floating around down there. You just want it to be damp to the touch. And I'm starting some tomatoes in this one. Then I'm going to take a little bit of water just to get that damp in there and kind of mix that around. Where gardeners, getting dirty is the norm. So I just want it damp. I don't want it to be soggy. And in a container this size, again, this is a half-gallon milk container. Was the lid. I can still use the lid to hold some moisture in there, use it like a little greenhouse. But in a container like this, I'm going to want to start something that I'm not going to take back out. So in other words, I won't repot it. I'm just going to leave it in here till it gets going and it's ready to go into the garden. And in this case, I'm going to plant some kabocha winter squash. And this is a squash that needs a pretty long growing season. It needs about 110 days. I've grown them in the past and they've done very well. So I'm just going to not bury the seed too deeply, just pushing the seed in and then lightly covering it with some soil. Then I'm going to take my little spray bottle and just get it slightly damp. If I need a little bit more soil to cover it, now's the time. Again, get that wet. The other thing seeds need to really get going and to do well, they need warmth. And so you can't put these on the porch or the back patio. They need to have like a sunny windowsill. I'm using a dog heating bed, and I've got a little rack to hold some of these guys up and off of it. I've got a temperature gauge in here so I know what the temperature is down there. 78 degrees on that. And I'll just park this guy back in there and I can cover it till it starts to grow, and then once it grows I'll take the cover off. But that cover is just there to help hold the moisture in and so that it doesn't dry out. At no time during the seed starting phase do you want this to dry out. If the soil dries out, then effectively the seed has died and then you get to start over. So once they're up, sunny windowsill, I've got the window curtain closed right now so that, because there's too much glare, but normally it would be open. These guys would be sitting on the windowsill. Once they get a little bit bigger, then I can pot them into a bigger container, and so I would just place them into here. So I'd put some potting soil in, I'd transplant it into there, and bury it a little bit deeper. Tomatoes you can do that with so that it can get going. And the other important thing is to mark what you're growing. And so I take a Sharpie and I put what it is that I've got in here because I will not remember. So I'm just going to put down that I'm growing a kabocha winter squash and the date that I've planted it. That way I can watch it and make sure that it, if it doesn't germinate in 14 days, 14 days would be kind of long for that. But if it doesn't germinate in 14 days, then I know that I can start over. And I've got enough time that I can do that. And again, I'm not going to take it out of that. I'm not going to retransplant it or put it into a bigger container. I'm just going to leave it in that. And this is a squash that does like to have a lot of room to roam, and the vines are going to get about 20 feet long. So this is one that is probably not going to be suitable for a container, but a regular garden it would do just fine in. And okay, I'm just reading the comments and making sure I'm not missing anything. Again, this is a little water bottle. This started off looking like this, and I just cut the cut it in half. And so I'm also going to use this to do seed starting in. And one of the important things in a vegetable garden, whether it's your outside regular, outside big vegetable garden where you've dug up some soil and part of the sod, or whether it's in a little container, do some container gardening, is that you've got some flowers in there. You want to give your bees reason to come to your garden. So again, I don't need to fill this container full. I've just got it halfway full there with soil. I don't have drainage holes in here. This is clear. I can see what the soil moisture level is doing. Too much water and you drown the seeds or the little seedling as it's coming up. But one of the important things to have in your garden is to have flowers. And I particularly like alyssum. Alyssum supports little hoverflies, and these little hoverflies like to go after aphids. So they're a natural predator, and they help keep the bad bug population down. And these guys can be a little bit more crowded in the container. So if you guys can see that kind of looks like dust. So when you have seeds this tiny, they don't necessarily want to have a lot of cover. They don't want to be buried deep into the soil. Okay, you guys can all go in there, play together. So I have made some soil in advance. And I just want to put a very, very light cover over the top of these guys. I don't want them deeply buried because they're so tiny. Some seeds need sunlight to germinate, and alyssum likes to have a little bit of sunlight to get itself going. Again, I'm going to mark this because I'm not going to remember. Put the date down that I've done this. I planted them. Put them on my heating mat. And again, if you don't have a heating mat, this is just a dog bed for winter use that I'm now using for my seed starting. And so it doesn't have to be anything special. So seed packets. I do want to talk a little bit about how to read these seed packets. And of course, I'm going on faith that you can actually see what I'm looking at here. There's a whole bunch of numbers on the back of this seed packet. And it talks about days to germination. So your days to germination is exactly that. If I put this in the soil under ideal conditions, this is really ideal conditions because it's warm. I'm keeping it moist, I'm monitoring it, making sure everything is going correctly. Then this squash, this is a table queen squash, should germinate in 8 days. Then it says days to harvest is 80 days. But there's some information, there's some dates in between that they're not giving you, so this isn't the full story. So 8 days to germinate. This is now, these tomatoes germinate in about 5 days, 4 to 5 days. But they're still just sitting there, they're thinking about life, they're putting down roots. They're not really at any point that's ready to be put out into a garden. So it's going to take them another 2 to 3 weeks to get to transplant size. And that's the size you would use to put them actually into the garden. And then once you've got them in the garden, then there's an adjustment period, kind of like a transplant shock time, where they're going to have to adjust to the new soil and their new environment. So you really have another 28 days to 30 days from the time the plant germinates to the time you can actually start counting those 80 days. So it's really the 8 days plus the 30 days plus an 80 days before you really can start thinking about harvest. And a winter squash, these guys are something that you plant and you just sort of watch them grow all summer. And you really don't harvest them till fall anyway. But if you're looking at doing tomatoes and you want your tomatoes, you know, these are little cherry tomatoes that I've got going here. And if you want them to, you actually want to have something by the 4th of July. 4th of July is always my kind of my benchmark, my target time. Then you're going to want to count backwards. And so cherry tomatoes, you can look at having a harvest in about 70 days. So again, add the 30 days, there's 100 days plus 5 days for germination. So you want to count backwards, and if you want something on the 4th of July, that means that you need to actually start your seeds at the beginning of April in order to have that by 4th of July tomato. The big tomatoes, like your beefsteak tomatoes, those are really hard to get ripe in a meaningful time frame in the summer. And part of it is that they're just so big and they take so much energy and they need a lot of heat in order to become something that you can eat. So stick with tomatoes that are going to be 10 ounces or less. So you're looking at tomatoes that are going to be a little bit smaller, but that days to maturity or days to harvest, that number should be fairly small. And there are tomatoes out there that are 55 days to 75 days, and that's really what you want to go for. And there's some other seeds, some other vegetable seeds that I really don't try to start early or start in advance. Those are going to be my green beans, my cucumbers. Those I'm not going to start early. My cilantro, I'm not going to, my herbs, this is cilantro, I'm not going to start that early. And I'm also not going to want to start carrots or beets, anything that wants to go into it has a root. I will just plant those direct into the soil in the vegetable garden. And then as far as like onions go, if I'm going to start onions from seed, I'm going to just treat those as scallions for salads or stir fry or something. But if I actually want onions that are going to be bulbing, I don't want to go with sets, but I start off with actual plants. And so this is what they look like. And I've picked these up at one of the big box stores yesterday. And so these are actually individual plants. And you're just going to plant this guy direct into the ground, and I usually bury it a good 1.5 inches into the soil, and then I'll mulch it. And I'll actually start, I'll plant these this weekend. I'll be ready to cover them with something, some straw, some hay, a sheet, anything in case it gets really cold out or we get a snow. So growing in a, green beans. One more thing about green beans. Any of your legumes, these are yard-long green beans. These are absolutely marvelous. They're one of my favorites, and they've got just, the flavor can't be beat on these. But they need to have what's called an inoculant, a soil inoculant, in order for them to do well, to produce well, and to have that full flavor. So when I order my vegetable seeds, and this unfortunately you can only get this through the seed catalogs, but I usually order this at the same time I get my seeds. Territorial carries it, Johnny Select Seed carries this, and it's a black powder, and it's a rhizobium bacteria that attaches to the seed's root and helps the seed. Of course, it looks like just a little dirt, but it attaches to the seed and it helps that root take in nitrogen. And without this, the plant just struggles, and it'll struggle all summer long. The green bean plant itself will be yellowish and not produce as well as it should. So that helps that plant perform to what it should. So it's very important to add that. It's not very expensive. I've yet to see it carried at any of the stores, and so you do need to mail order that. So if you're going to grow in a container where you don't have a big garden or a place where you can actually dig up half the yard, then you can always go with containers, and a whiskey barrel, half whiskey barrel works. I have mineral tubs, and a lot of times you can go to your feed store like ANC Feed or All Around Feed, give them a call first and see if they've got some empty sheep mineral tubs or cattle mineral tubs. These are sheep mineral tubs. They're a little bit smaller. So this is my arm. They're not very deep, but I'm also not going to plant. What I'll do is drill holes in here for drainage. So I'll just drill some random holes in here. I'm not going to add rocks to it. I'm not going to put any other material in here for more drainage. The rocks really don't achieve a lot, and it just makes it a lot heavier. But I'm also not going to fill this full of soil. I'm going to take it up to about here, max here. So in here is my fill line, but I'm not going to go, I'm assuming you all can see that. I'm not going to go any deeper, any more soil than right here. Part of it is just weight and trying to move this around. But it also gives your plants a little bit of wind protection, and it gives a place for you to add water and not have it flow over the sides. So in a container this size, I can put a tomato, and I would encourage you to get something that's going to be small, a determinate tomato, so it's only going to get maybe 3 feet tall, and then stake it, prune it, so I'd put it right in the middle, and then I would stake that tomato so it grows up, and then along the sides there's a lot of container sized plant vegetables that you can put in here, some green beans, some carrots. Definitely put some flowers in here. Cosmos is a little too big, but the alyssum would be perfect in here. Maybe some lobelia to give it some more color, bring in some pollinators. But there's even on a tub that's this small, you can grow a lot in here. So the soil that you're going to want to put in here, you really want to refrain from your garden soil, the soil that's out in your backyard. And part of it, again, is that it's just very heavy, and because you don't have a lot of drainage in there, it's just going to be a heavy soil, hard for the plants to work in. So again, get some good potting soil. You can mix that potting soil with your gardening soil, your existing soil, and put it in there, but I wouldn't put just plain garden soil in there straight. It's just not gonna, you're not gonna have happy results with it, and you will have some weed pressure. So do mix that, the two soils together, and help your plants achieve what they can with that. Also, don't forget to mark, once you get it out of the container, don't forget to mark it in the garden. And I do use these and write on there what it is, because again, once I get it in the ground and I get a bunch of stuff planted, I'm not going to remember what it is that I planted. So marking everything is important. This is my 10-20 tray, and I've marked everything on the front. But I've also marked everything back here so that once I get it out into the garden, I've got the stake already existing, and I can just transfer the stake right to what I'm planted. And in here I've got cabbage, I've got cauliflower, broccoli, I've got 3 different types of Anaheim peppers growing. And I'm also growing a sweet corn in here. And the sweet corn is a real long season sweet corn. It's an 85-day sweet corn. And again, if you start counting 85 days, plus it takes sweet corn 14 days to germinate. It takes it another 2 weeks to get to transplant size, so there's your 28 days. On top of the 85 days, you know, it puts you really late into the season. And again, my benchmark is always, you know, can I have sweet corn and tomatoes on the 4th of July? That's what I would like to have. So I always count backwards. I'm going to start this early, but I'm also going to do succession planting. Excuse me. And that way I've got stuff I can continue to harvest all throughout the season. I also, if I'm going to start these guys, start corn seed inside, I'm going to soak it first. And so I put this in water last night. So it's been soaking for 24 hours and it's gotten pretty good size. So for this, again, I'm just going to poke it in pointy side down on the sweet corn, lightly cover it. If I don't have it completely covered, I'll go back and add a little bit more soil to it. And so this is a variety of sweet corn called Incredible. It's very, very sweet sweet corn, but a very long season one. And when you grow sweet corn, you do need to check the seed packet or the catalog, and that seed just sort of unhappy. And make sure that the corn is appropriate for this area. And a good seed catalog like Johnny's or Territorial Park, Burpee, they'll all give you information as to whether the corn will grow in cool soil or whether it will grow north of the 38th parallel. So we're on the 41st parallel. And so if it grows north, you should do just fine with that, north of the 38th. But again, you don't want something that's long season. And the corn that they sell in the big box stores is Silver Queen. And that is, in a normal year, about a 90-day sweet corn. And it's just not going to do real well for us here. So I would encourage you to go through some seed catalogs, read them, find out what is going to do well for you and well for your garden. You can grow sweet corn. There are varieties of sweet corn that grow in containers. They don't get very big, maybe about 4 feet tall. But this is Territorial Seed Catalog, and it has a whole explanation here of what it takes, the cultural requirements for growing that particular crop. So these seed catalogs come with just an absolute wealth of information. Soil temperature that it will germinate 65 to 85 degrees. So I take a meat thermometer, just an inexpensive meat thermometer, and I'll plunk it into the soil and take the temperature of the soil. And kind of like where I'm keeping track of the temperature here in my seed starting operation, I will do the same out into the soil, out in my regular garden. And it talks about days to emergence. So for corn, I've always find that it's about 14 days. Then it takes at least, again, another 14 days to get it to transplant size. But do read the seed descriptions here so that you know that you're getting the right seed for your growing environment and that you can have a successful crop. So any questions? Now that I've been the one talking for a half an hour, are there any questions out there? And I'm looking at the chat box over here. So I must have done a really good job explaining seed starting, or else my system's not working. Yes, Joan came back and said,
Catherine,
yes, I
I have
did.
a question.
Okay.
So in the container, you said not to use rocks because it makes it too heavy. In the past, I've had someone recommend using packing peanuts to raise things up without adding weight. What's your thoughts on that?
You can add packing peanuts. It's just at some point, with that soil that's in a container, you're going to need to dump that soil out and re-amend that soil, because you cannot keep using the same soil year after year and expect to get good results. And so now you've got to deal with those packing peanuts, and they can harbor a lot of algae and bad bacteria. So I'm just not a huge fan of putting anything unnecessary into the container. And if you've got holes in there, you should be good with drainage.
Did you talk about how often to water in a container?
So this is, I think container growing is a little bit more fiddly than trying to grow in a regular garden. And you do need to check, sometimes you need to actually check twice a day. So you should check the container in the morning and make sure that it's moist, and then check it again in the afternoon or when you come back from work and make sure that it hasn't dried out. Because again, trying to grow seed in something like that, totally doable, but you do have to manage it pretty closely.
And I think something came across on the chat box. I'll let Joan read that one.
Yeah, Paul said that the packing peanuts will float out to sort and screen, rocks will sink. Well, that's a good point.
Yeah, not pretty when that happens. Not pretty. I'm just not a big proponent of putting a lot of stuff down in the bottom. And again, this is a sheep mineral tub. I've only got this much soil in there, and so I don't have a lot of growing space in there to begin with. And if I put this much with rocks in there, that just sort of eliminates a lot of that growing space. Drainage shouldn't be a problem with the holes in the bottom. And I've got several of these mineral tubs that have got cracked bottoms in there, so you don't even have to worry about doing that, putting drainage, because it's already existing.
So I bought a package of
thoughts.
I bought a package of bush beans to start, and I didn't buy the rhizome stuff that you talked about. Do I have any options at this point?
Yeah, get on Johnny's or Territorial Park or Burpee, and and just mail order it. It's not very expensive. I think it's like $5 a packet or something.
Do you know why they don't just include it in with the package of beans, a little package of it?
So it's a living organism, and it's very prone to, so I'm glad you brought that up. It's a living organism, and when I get it, I immediately put it in my refrigerator. And I try to use it all that same year. The stuff I've got is old. Some of it goes back to 2017, and so I know it's not going to be good anymore. And so it just makes a great hand tool prop for doing a program. But it has to be fresh. And when you get it, it's got to go into a cool, dry place. You can't leave it on the counter. You can't leave it in the sun. So you got to take very, very careful care of it. And of course, I'm not going to find it right off, but it's not very expensive. It's it's worth getting it just so that you've got a better yield and a better flavored green bean. Otherwise, your green beans are just, they struggle. They turn yellow. They have a real hard time growing and putting on beans and doing well. Any other questions? So I set this up so that it would be, look at all my toys here. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions and thoughts or comments.
Catherine, thank you for doing this. I have learned more in this half-hour presentation than I ever knew about gardening.
Well, I think seed starting is pretty easy. I kind of learned by the seat of my pants when I was in high school, and I've learned a whole lot more now. And there's some of these that are a little bit more persnickety than others, but reading that seed packet, there's a lot of information on a good seed packet, or even in the description of in the catalogs. Peppers, some peppers like a little bit more sun to germinate in, just a light covering of soil. Some of them like to be buried. I've had green beans in my garden that got rototilled 8 inches deep, and they still germinated and came up. So all of these guys have a little different requirements. This is just sort of a broad overview, but one of the things I really want, one of the take-home messages I want is that you can start seeds in just about anything. You know, a deli container, a milk carton, you know, another milk carton here, salad bowl. So there's all sorts of different ways that you can do this. It doesn't have to be, you know, a fancy 10-20 tray with seed starting ability. So anything simple. And this is just inexpensive. I think this actually blew in more than I bought it, and just a baker's rack and a dog heating bed. So you don't even need all of that. It's just a warm place to get things started. Yep.
So you said not to start the cilantro in a.
I don't start any of my herbs early. I just start them all out in the garden. I mean, you can certainly start herbs now. They have a tendency to get real leggy, and they're more insect prone when you start them inside. They're a lot more prone to aphids, especially. And you've got to be real careful about your seed starting mix. Miracle Grow, I'm going to pick on Miracle Grow, is especially notorious for having fungus gnats in it, and that can cause you some problems. So I'm very careful about what I start my seeds in. I like to mix my own seed starting mix.
And what about if you're going to keep those herbs inside, though?
Inside, have strong light, a windowsill that gets a lot of light for a long period of time, hours, not just a little bit of time, but hours. Yeah,
So
I mean, you can definitely do.
I bought some little metal tins about 5 inches in diameter to keep my herbs in. So should I start the herb seeds in those, or should I just go ahead and start them in? I have that nice little 10 by 20 with the cover to keep it all greenhousey.
I'd start it in the 10 by 20.
Okay.
I'd start it in this guy here. A lot easier to control the environment. I like something where I can have a lid on it to keep the humidity in, because like I said, if this dries out, the seed is dead. So you don't want to let that seed dry out. You want to keep it evenly moist all the time. If it doesn't have a lid on it, you need to find a way to make a lid. You know, I would put some saran wrap, you know, like this guy, I would put some saran wrap over the top of it. This has a lid to it. My little water bottle guy over here, you know, I just custom cut this so that it would fit back on and fit snugly in there. And the alyssum will come up in like 5 days. So will most of the herbs will germinate within 5 days. So they're very fast. Anything else? Joan, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Okay. If there are any more questions, then I think we're done.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Okay, thanks everybody.